A freight train to Tehran, the first step linking China to the West via the new Silk Road. What is the regional and global impact of Sino-Iran relations? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. China's first freight train on the new Silk Road rolled into Tehran in February, bringing sanction-weary Iran China-manufactured products and economic hope. CCTV's Wang Tongshuan joins us now for more. And Tongshuan, we recently saw that first train from China go into Tehran. What does this mean for China's One Belt, One Road project?
But Anand, the Yiwu-Tehran train is a significant part of Beijing's plans for regional integration. China's Belt and Road project, also referred to as the New Silk Road, includes plans to build roads, ports, railways and other infrastructure from China to the Middle East through Central, South and Southeast Asia. China sees Iran as a regional power, so the trains carrying Chinese goods will not terminate in Tehran but run further onto European markets through a massive network connecting China with different parts of Asia and Europe. China is Iran's biggest trading partner, accounting for most of Tehran's oil exports. Besides facilitating China-Iran trade, those rail lines will contribute to Iran's emergence as an important Eurasia trade hub. So with this infrastructure development and construction, the two nations have paved the way for greater links along the Silk Road economic belt. Anand.
Now, President Xi Jinping visited Tehran earlier this year. Where do China-Iran relations stand today, and how are these relations between the two countries expected to evolve?
Well, President Xi's visit came just days after Western-led sanctions on Iran were lifted. During his trip, the two countries agreed to elevate their ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The Chinese President Xi Jinping said, in history, China and Iran have had no fundamental conflicts, and the friendship between them goes back more than 2,000 years because of the ancient Silk Road, which used to be a key trading route linking the Chinese and Persian civilizations. The Belt and Road Initiative has offered really the two countries a whole new opportunity to rejuvenate their old relations. In the future, in terms of the pragmatic cooperation, many believe there can be great potential in such fields as infrastructure, high-speed railway, natural gas and oil pipelines. So in general, the Belt and Road Initiative will not only enhance their economic and trade relations, but also provide business opportunities for the people of both countries. Anand.
Thanks, Tongshuan. That's CCTV's Wang Tongshuan reporting from Beijing. Joining us now from Tehran, Mohammad Marandi is an Iranian academic and professor at the University of Tehran. From Beijing, He Wenping is a professor and director of African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And from Frankfurt, Germany, F. William Engdahl is an author, lecturer and political risk analyst. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Dr. Marandi, we've just had the first cargo train from China arrive in Tehran, what the Chinese news agency Xinhua describes as a milestone in reviving the Silk Road. What does it mean for Iran, which, as we know, has been under severe international sanctions for the past few years?
Well, it is very important. The Iranian economy traditionally had been focused on imports and exports from the Persian Gulf region and Turkey. More recently, since the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, Iran's trade relations with Afghanistan, but more importantly with Iraq, have also expanded dramatically. But the road to Central Asia and the Silk Road, which would lead from Iran to China, is, I think, a development that goes beyond anything that we've seen in recent decades. The potential is extraordinarily large, and it will develop the Iranian north as well as the northeast, and it will also make many products for Iranians much more inexpensive, especially agricultural goods in Central Asia. The fact that China also wants to develop the west of its country makes this even more significant. It's also an opening for Iran to export potentially oil and gas to China through Central Asia.
Dr. He, the One Belt, One Road initiative, that's the Chinese Regional Economic Initiative, it will open up ancient trading routes, reopen those routes. What role does Iran play in China's overall plan?
Well, I think Iran, because it enjoys very important strategic position, and also it serves a link with Europe and the Middle East and also China. So certainly it will play a very fundamental role for this One Belt, One Road initiative implementing. Like this cargo train now finally arrived in Tehran, I think this is a very important milestone things, because not only for Iran to further expand its trade links with not only those Middle East countries, as my Iranian colleague has mentioned, with Iraqi, with Turkey, and also links with the Far East like China. And for China's One Belt, One Road initiative, this is a very practical thing, needs to be celebrated because One Belt, One Road has been put forward right now. Basically, it hasn't been implemented in a big step. We know that China-Pakistan corridor, that project now is under constructing, but now this railway, now the cargo train now has finally arrived in Tehran, can be regarded as another very feasible and tangible thing has been achieved. So I think through this Belt Road, especially Iran, because Iran enjoys a lot of advantages for helping Belt Road initiative implementing, because first it's quite stable, second it has very rich resources, and China has already enjoyed a long time good relationship with Iran, even when Iran under the sanction given by the Western countries. And thirdly, I think Iran has a very strong industrial base and has a very highly education, those graduate students, education level is quite high. So given all those factors and advantages, so certainly in China, I think academic circle almost has reached a consensus saying Iran should enjoy the highest and the strongest feasibility to implement this Belt Road initiative all around the way.
Right, William, these are, of course, small beginnings, but both China and Iran are looking at growing and developing this relationship. They're talking about this relationship being worth something like $600 billion over the next 10 years. President Xi Jinping has been to Iran. He's met with President Hassan Rouhani. What does it look like from the United States and from Western countries? I mean, do they see this burgeoning relationship as a threat?
The United States is losing power everywhere. The dollar system that was established at Bretton Woods in 1944 is choking with public debt and private debt. The unemployment levels are at 1930s depression level, but they're not accurately reported by the government labor department. And now they see the coming together of their worst nightmare in terms of geopolitics, Brzezinski, Kissinger, and so forth, and that is the coming together of the nations of Eurasia, Russia, China, Iran. I speak of a golden triangle that's developing between those three countries, and interestingly enough, they're all looking toward gold backing for their national currencies rather than paper dollar backing, which is becoming increasingly worthless. And I think the reaction in Washington, as it's beginning to dawn on them, the genius of this One Belt, One Road, new economic Silk Road initiative, to which the European, or the Eurasian rather, economic union with Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Armenia, and so forth, that links up a landmass across Eurasia that will be the most economically vibrant place on this entire planet for at least the next 50 years, if we're not foolish enough to destroy the planet with nuclear catastrophe. and I don't think we will. I think it will succeed.
Dr. Marandi, as Dr. He pointed out, the relationship between China and Iran goes back a long way, even to those dark days when Iran was under sanctions, when the West tried to isolate Iran. How would you characterize the overall relationship between these two countries?
I think the relationship is extraordinarily good. I think after the visit to Tehran by the Chinese president, the two countries will probably be able to take a few steps even further and expand their relations at a more rapid pace. The comprehensive joint plan of action that was signed between the Iranians and the P5+1, I think, helps. But even more important, or at least just as important, is the fact that countries like China and Russia are increasingly seeing Iran as the most reliable partner in this part of the world. So countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Emirates, which export Wahhabism, or at least support extremist groups and Wahhabi groups across the board, they are becoming increasingly they're creating fear among countries that have Muslim populations, because there's a concern that these countries will export their ideology to those states. So what we see now in Nigeria, for example, with regards to Boko Haram, or in Somalia, Al-Shabaab, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIL, all of these have the Wahhabi ideology that is exported from countries like Saudi Arabia. And the biggest obstacle that could actually damage the One Silk, One Road initiative is the spread of this extremism into Central Asia, which would be a major security risk for all the countries involved, but it would also prevent the expansion of trade relations. So I think that now that this global situation is changing, and taking into account the extremism that is that has been growing in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, this is itself an incentive for China and Iran and Russia, as well as Central Asian countries, to cooperate more intensely, and especially on security issues alongside economic ones.
Dr. He, China depends on Iran for something like, well, 10 to 15% of its energy needs. Is this relationship being driven to a large extent by that Chinese need, or is that perhaps too much of a narrow definition of the relationship between these two countries?
I think both can tell the motivation. Of course, China, since 1993, China has turned itself from oil exporter becoming an oil importer. And with this high economic growth rate has been there for decades, and this oil demanding also is getting higher and higher. So that's why we rely our oil import mainly on the Middle East. Because those very high quality of those crude oil. So that's one of the reasons. And the second reason, as you rightly put forward, is because China-Iran also enjoys a very good relationship. So even under, I mentioned, even under the sanction time, and China still served as the biggest trade partner with Iran. So this biggest trade partner and the biggest oil consumer for Iran's oil has been, I think, is the two heads China now has. So with this good historical foundation, I think now Iran has entering a new phase of development, given this sanction has been lifted. So Iran, once again, back to the international economy. So we and China also, now we have been implementing this One Belt, One Road. So this is a kind of historical opportunity, both for Iran and for China. Now, I think given those very good historical foundation. For example, China has engaged with lots of infrastructure construction in Iran, like the subway and those railway and also the road construction. So China also enjoyed this competitive advantage. So in terms of infrastructure as well as those energy and the resources cooperation. Resources cooperation will be developed further. That's for sure, because Iran now can have their power to export their crude oil without any limitation or those sanctions. So that will say another. I think the cooperation will getting wider and deeper.
Okay, we are going to have to take a break right now, but coming up, is Iran the key to China's push for stability in the region? Our panel will weigh in on that. Stay with us, you're watching The Heat. Welcome back. We're talking about China's relationship with Iran and the country's role in the One Belt, One Road initiative. Still with us, Mohammed Marandi is a political analyst. He Wenping is with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and F. William Engdahl is an author and geopolitical analyst. So, William, let me start with you. For this part of the show, as Dr. Marandi pointed out, this is an important part of the world, but it's also a volatile part of the world, which is susceptible to all kinds of influences, which is susceptible to the export of the radical brand of Islam that we see in some parts of the Middle East. Has China taken the view that the best way to achieve stability in this part of the world is through economic growth, through economic relationships, rather than talk about regime change and threats that everything is on the table, etc.? As China is saying, no, the way to this is to build up our economic relationship.
I very much agree with that. The problem is the Western nations, especially my own country, the United States, and Britain, for its part, NATO, do not agree with that, and they are trying to stir up trouble and friction in every part of the world, especially toward China with the South China Sea conflict, and with Russia, with the Ukraine conflict, to break relations between Russia and continental Europe, the European Union, especially Germany. So, and then the war in Syria is adding to that, the whole so-called Arab Spring, where the U.S. State Department and the U.S. intelligence services are up to their necks in dirty operations in those countries, to simply create massive regime changes and justification for NATO militarization of the oil fields of the Middle East. The Silk Road space is a geopolitical nightmare. If you go back to the father of Western geopolitics, Sir Alfred Mackinder, in 1919, after the First World War and the Treaty at Versailles, he actually spelled out a geopolitical diagram of the world where he said the nation who controls Central Europe, or who controls Central Europe, meaning Germany, France, Poland, and so on, controls the Eurasian landmass, the heartland, which he largely meant Russia, but also China at later times. And who controls the heartland of Eurasia controls the world island, which goes down to Iran and the entire rich oil regions of the Middle East, and who controls the world island controls the world. And Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, all the leading voices of post-war American foreign policy are rooted in that version of geopolitics, and it's a preordained recipe for disaster, as we've seen. So I think the Silk Road and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is increasingly aware of these color revolutions in Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan or the various other stands along the Silk Road. In China itself, Xinjiang province has significant problems with the Uyghur, and Turkey is not innocent of feeding those problems, recruiting students who then are sent to Syria and become Wahhabite jihadists and are sent back in to make trouble in Western China, where all the oil pipelines and oil fields of China, most of them, crisscross between Kazakhstan, Russia, and China. So there definitely has to be an active and effective counterterrorism component to the new Silk Road. And I think the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes all of Central Asia, China, and Russia, and now I fully expect that by the next annual meeting of SCO this coming summer or later in the year, that Iran will be also admitted, as have Pakistan and India in last year's SCO meeting. And there you will have the basis for a very effective defense of a positive development in Eurasia. And that's good for the entire world.
Right. Dr. Marandi, of course, these two countries are not just talking about building their trade relationship. President Rouhani said that the two nations, Iran and China, have agreed to cooperate on issues like terrorism and combating extremism, especially the extremism that comes out of places like Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Yemen. What form does that cooperation take?
Well, I believe it will probably include elements of intelligence and intelligence cooperation, but also I think at a more strategic level and the two countries will be cooperating. We have to keep into account one of the major advantages of Central Asia is the fact that it is not accessible to international powers like the United States, therefore, or other potential antagonists. So, for example, when Iran trades with China through sea, there is potential that some power or some antagonist could impede trade relations. Central Asia does not have that problem. It also the extra advantage is that it is much closer to China. The distance between northeastern Iran and western China is actually quite short, and a very short air flight is needed to travel from one country to the other. However, the problem again is that just like in Syria and Iraq, no one expected 2 decades ago, that these countries would grow so unstable, largely because of extremism which has been exported there by Saudi Arabia, by Turkey, as the previous guest rightly pointed out, and by Western powers. We know that, for example, the former head of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency and the Pentagon admitted that the United States took a willful decision to help these neighboring countries in Syria and Iraq to export Wahhabi extremists to these countries. So the potential is there for foreign powers who wish to impede greater cooperation between Iran, Russia, China, and Central Asian countries. The potential is there for them to stir up trouble. And therefore, it's very important for the intelligence services to work together, but also for the countries to coordinate in developing the region in order to prevent mass unemployment, from helping to increase the number of people that could be attracted to Saudi Wahhabi extremism.
Dr. He, what is the Chinese view on this? How do you see the political strategic diplomatic relationship between China and Iran grow in the future?
I think, as we discussed above, not only the economic cooperation now existing between China and Iran, and also not only this economic cooperation can serve as a very solid foundation for those extremism, those ideology now widespreading. So I think apart from that, in order to strengthen and consolidate the very good political and diplomatic and strategic relations between China and Iran, we have to establish this bilateral relation in a comprehensive way, which is like anti-terror, like security cooperation, and also political cooperation, diplomatic cooperation should be undertaken in an all-round way. For example, like this anti-terror, even though China at the moment, we haven't like Russian had done, send our airplane, firefighter, those soldiers, or the special forces all the way to the frontier. But we can do like intelligence sharing, intelligence information sharing, and also like the training. And another thing I think we can do is education, because those extremism ideology now is, I think that's the root causes for all those potential, terrorists. So those terrorists, at the very beginning, they are just ordinary people. They are the ordinary youth. So why they are turn themselves from a citizen and then becoming a terrorist? Because they have been penetrated with those like Wahhabism and also this, those very extremist ideology. So the education and also even the religions should be taught in a very correct way. So it's not saying when you mention somebody they are Muslim or they believe the Islam, and then people are thinking, oh, they are the dangerous people. But I think this is a distortion about those Islam itself. So actually education is very important. So in our like a western area, like Xinjiang and then Qinghai and those vast area in our western part, so I think this challenge is quite huge. So we also have like hundreds those people, youth people, they trying to go to the Syria and go to the even the Iraqi to join those holy war. So I think we can do a lot together with Iran to stop those trends.
William, to the point you made just a moment ago on stability in Central Asia, the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a United States-based think tank, it produced a paper in which it said it remains to be seen if the United States and China will clash over their competing plans for developing energy resources in Central Asia's Turkmenistan, creating infrastructure in Pakistan, or winning political influence with governments throughout Asia. Given that, are we going to see increasing competition to, find favor with these governments between Washington and Beijing?
Well, there's going to be military tensions, and whoever is elected president in November, that will increase between China and Washington. The energy competition is really a chimera in my view, because the collapse of the U.S. shale industry that's underway as we speak right now, and has been underway for more than a year since the collapse in oil prices in September of 2014, the agreement between John Kerry and the then King of Saudi Arabia, Abdullah, who's since deceased, that has collapsed the growth point of the U.S. oil and gas industry. They're talking about export of natural gas to Europe, to China, whatever, LNG, but it's not doable. The financial resources from Wall Street banks are not there to rebuild this battered thing called the shale industry. So there is not the resource base to compete successfully with Iran and with Russia and the other countries of Eurasia. And it's largely a bluff or a bluster from Washington to keep these countries from cooperating more closely. It's not working, however.
And that's where we are going to have to end it. F. William Engdahl, Dr. Mohammad Marandi, Dr. He Wenping, thanks to all of you for joining us. And that's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. For articles, videos, and unique online content, visit our website at cctv-america.com. And we're always available on our social media channels. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Weibo. You can find those links on our website. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.